Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking a single razor-sharp focus on 4 minutes of human decision-making. A moment so intense, so charged with duty and sacrifice, it really redefined command under the most lethal pressure imaginable.
It really did.
This isn't just history, this is a situational triage at 25,000 feet.
That 4-minute period, it happened on February 23rd, 1944, high above occupied Germany. We are going to dissect the final just catastrophic moments of a B-17 flying fortress known as the Yankee Doodle.
And the pilot was a 23-year-old Lieutenant John Morgan from Ohio.
Exactly. And our mission here, it's not simply to recount a heroic anecdote. We want to understand the physics and I think the psychology of ultimate leadership when it's framed by this terrifying statistical reality of being a bomber crewman in 1944.
Let's set the scene precisely, because context is everything here. It's early morning, it's minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit outside the aluminum skin of the bomber, and Morgan is scanning his dials in the sky.
And he's part of a massive formation. 300 bombers strong all locked onto one high-value target, the Messerschmitt aircraft factory in Regensburg.
So the air is thin, the cold is penetrating, and the German defenses are, well, they're about to unleash hell.
The sources make it brutally clear. As Morgan performs his final instrument check, he knows that in just 4 minutes, his aircraft could, and likely will, become what they called a flying coffin.
For the men of the 8th Air Force, every single mission was a gamble, but this one, this deep penetration raid into the heart of Bavaria, was particularly dangerous.
Yeah, the routine started at 0600 hours at Thorpe Abbotts Air Base in England. And the Yankee Doodle crew, they weren't rookies. This is their 16th mission.
So they were hardened veterans.
They were, which really meant they understood the statistical probability of not finishing their tour of duty. They knew the odds.
Let's name the men who filled that aircraft, because their interdependence is just so key to understanding Morgan's eventual choice. They were 10 highly specialized individuals, a fragile ecology of skill packed into that metal tube.
Right, so you have the pilot, John Morgan from Ohio.
His co-pilot, Lieutenant James Chin from California, Morgan's right hand.
Then the navigator, Lieutenant Robert Walsh from Massachusetts, and the bombardier, Staff Sergeant David Kleen, New York.
And those 4 occupied the deadly exposed nose and cockpit section.
Exactly. Then further back, you've got the guys controlling the aircraft systems and communications. Flight engineer Technical Sergeant Frank Russo from Pennsylvania, who also, operated the dorsal turret.
And the radio operator, Staff Sergeant William Hayes from Texas.
Then you get to the lonely, just terrifying positions. The ball turret gunner, Sergeant Michael O'Brien from Illinois, literally hanging beneath the aircraft.
The exposed flanks were guarded by waist gunners, Sergeant Thomas Rivera from Arizona and Sergeant Charles Anderson from Michigan.
And finally, alone at the furthest point back, tail gunner Sergeant Henry Jackson from Georgia.
The B-17 itself, the flying fortress, it was famous for its toughness. A powerful machine driven by 4 Wright Cyclone engines, bristling with 13.50 caliber machine guns, capable of carrying 8,000 pounds of bombs.
It was built to absorb punishment, but the source material is very clear on this. The pilots learned really quickly that the boast of being able to absorb damage rarely translated into a guarantee of survival.
And that toughness was tested almost immediately, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. At 0943 hours, they crossed into German airspace. And the crystal clear winter sky, that was actually tactically horrible for the bombers.
Right, because good visibility for them means good visibility for the enemy.
Exactly. It meant the German radar had tracked them since takeoff, and the Luftwaffe was already airborne and waiting for them.
So the contact was swift and violent.
At 0957 hours, the calm was just shattered by the voice of Sergeant Jackson, tight with adrenaline, calling out from the tail, "Bandits 11.0 high."
And these are the Focke-Wulf FW-190s, fast, heavily armed, and just relentless. They drove right through the formation.
The Yankee Doodle shuddered violently as 20-millimeter cannon rounds and heavy machine gun fire just tore through the aluminum skin. You could hear the roar of Russo's top turret guns, the rattle of hot brass casings bouncing around Morgan's feet.
But they rode out that first wave.
They did. Minor damage. Everyone was still functional. They probably thought they were lucky, but luck in the high-altitude air war was, as we've discussed, always fleeting. It just doesn't last.
So at 10,012 hours, the second wave hit, and this was orchestrated, overwhelming chaos.
Yeah, now the Messerschmitt Bf-109s joined the attack, hitting the formation from every possible angle. And Morgan, focused entirely on the mission objective, he held his course absolutely steady.
And this is where we zoom in on the leadership component, even before the catastrophic damage, right? Why hold steady when you're being attacked?
Because evasive maneuvers, banking and diving, while it might protect you for a second, it would scatter the formation and ruin the accuracy of the bomb pattern. It sacrifices the mission.
So Morgan chose mission success over immediate self-preservation. He needed to provide that stable platform for his bombardiers.
That's it. This wasn't stubbornness, but the ultimate expression of mission focus, even if it meant absorbing lethal damage, and that is a critical distinction in command studies.
And the cost of that stability was immediate and terrible. Just 50 feet to Morgan's left, the B-17, known as Memphis Belle II, just vanished.
It took a direct cannon hit to its number 3 engine. The engine exploded, the bomber nosed down. Morgan watched, counting only 3 parachutes before the bomber disappeared into the clouds.
7 men died in that instant, just a cold, hard reminder of their own fate.
Then at 10.18 hours, the focus snapped right back to the Yankee Doodle. A Bf-109, taking advantage of the concentrated formation, made the most lethal attack possible, a head-on pass.
And its cannons fired at absolute point-blank range, just pouring heavy shells into the nose of the plane.
The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. 20-millimeter shells ripped through the plexiglass nose. The bombardier, David Klein, he died instantly. His body slumped over the bomb site.
And the navigator, Robert Walsh, took devastating shrapnel to the chest and collapsed. The whole front of the bomber was just torn open.
The physical destruction continued right into the cockpit. Shell fragments ripped through the floor. Morgan felt the control column, the yoke kick violently in his hands.
The hydraulic system, which is what provided the essential power assistance to move the control surfaces against the massive aerodynamic forces of flight, was just destroyed.
Hydraulic fluid, thick and oily, sprayed everywhere. It splattered the instruments and the windshield.
I have to pause there. We hear hydraulics failed and we think of, like, a leak in a car. But at 25,000 feet, flying this massive heavy machine, that failure transforms the plane into a brute mechanical beast.
A pretty way to put it.
Without hydraulic pressure assisting the elevators and ailerons, Morgan wasn't flying the plane. He was wrestling it. He was relying purely on raw muscular strength against hundreds of pounds of wind resistance, trying to tear the wings off.
Nearly all of his focus was on that pure, raw, physical struggle. It's like trying to steer a truck at high speed with no power steering, now at minus 40-degree temperatures and incoming fire. The struggle was immediate.
And then the engines failed.
Yep. Number 2 engine on the left wing burst into bright, visible flames. Number 1 started smoking heavily. Both left engines were compromised, and the plane instantly became sluggish, heavy, and it began falling out of the protective formation. The wing, now on fire, was just hemorrhaging fuel.
Co-pilot Chen, though he was injured and covered in fluid, confirmed the nightmare. We're losing pressure, hydraulics are gone, fire in number 2.
They were spiraling downward 90 miles inside enemy territory. Protocol, taught relentlessly in training, dictated one thing and one thing only: bail out. Immediately.
But Morgan couldn't follow protocol, and this is the crisis point. Why?
The intercom system. It had been severed by the 20-millimeter shells. The crew members in the midsection, and especially the tail section, had no communication. They had no idea the cockpit was on fire, and the plane was structurally compromised.
So if Morgan rang the bell and jumped immediately, the uncontrollable aerodynamic spin the damaged bomber was already starting to enter would generate massive centrifugal force.
And that force would pin the rear crewmen, particularly the tail gunner, against the inside walls, making it physically impossible for them to reach their escape hatches.
So he's facing this terrible calculus. Jump now, save 3 or 4 men, and definitely kill the remaining 3 or 4. Or stay and risk everything to save everyone.
And it wasn't about heroism in that moment. It was about ensuring the survival of his command. Morgan was the only person who could possibly hold the B-17 level just long enough to ensure an orderly evacuation. And that person probably had to die with the aircraft.
Morgan looked at Chen. There was no need for discussion. Chen understood the absolute sacrifice required. Morgan's command was quiet, steady, and just chilling. Get him out. I'll hold her steady.
Chen hesitated only for a moment. The pain of leaving his commander to die. Then unbuckled his harness and climbed out of the cockpit, moving toward the rear of the aircraft to physically alert the crew members who were isolated by the failed intercom.
And now Morgan was completely alone in a cockpit that was an actively burning, crippled machine.
Okay, let's enter the 4-minute countdown. This is a battle against physics, time, and gravity.
So 0 to 1 minute. The left-wing fire intensified instantly. The number 2 engine was a raging furnace. The source describes it as a blowtorch. The flames were licking back. The heat was palpable even through the cockpit wall.
And the loss of power on the left side, combined with the extreme damage, meant the aircraft was trying desperately to roll left and nose over. Morgan had to exert extraordinary force, using all his muscular strength against the heavy, unassisted control column, just fighting the aerodynamic death throes in the plane to maintain wings-level flight.
At 60 seconds, the altitude indicator confirmed the severity of the situation. The B-17 was plummeting at 500 feet per minute.
And the urgency was simple: keep the nose up. If the nose dropped, the damaged aircraft would accelerate into a deadly, uncontrollable spin that would generate G-forces far too powerful for the men to escape from.
90 seconds to 2 minutes. Morgan risked a quick glance back. Chen was moving quickly, and there was a moment of, small, fragile relief. Rivera and Anderson, the waist gunners, had already bailed out.
Right, so 2 down. But the danger escalated exponentially. The fire had spread within the left wing structure, reaching the fuel tanks. The entire wing just became a visible inferno. The aluminum skin was melting and peeling away in sheets, revealing the internal structure like a skeleton.
Morgan knew structurally the wing was about to fail.
2 minutes in, the B-17 dropped through 19,000 feet. The German fighters, having expended their ammunition or just sensing the kill was imminent, had moved on. They were alone in the sky, which was a small mercy.
And then Chen reappeared in the cockpit doorway. He was moving quickly toward his seat, reaching for his parachute harness. He was panicked. "John, let's go. We've got to get out now."
Morgan just shook his head. He issued his final, cold, definitive order to his co-pilot. "Not yet. Count to 30. You must ensure they are clear of the aircraft before I lose control. Then you jump."
And Chen argued right, his voice cracking with urgency. "We don't have 30 seconds.
And Morgan insisted, his voice calm amidst the roaring fire and wind. "Then make it 20. Now go." Chen, realizing the order was non-negotiable, clipped on his chute and disappeared for the final time. Morgan was completely, devastatingly alone in the burning fuselage.
3 to 4 minutes. 3 minutes in, the bomber passed 17,000 feet. The fire had done its work. Morgan could now see the structural spars of the left wing glowing a dull, angry red.
He could feel the damaged wing flexing violently under the stresses of flight. He knew the breakup was imminent. He was counting internally, seconds turning into minutes in the desperate silence, focused entirely on the image of his crew's parachutes opening safely.
At 3 minutes and 30 seconds, the physical battle was lost. The wing spar, the primary internal structure holding the wing to the fuselage, snapped. The source describes the sound as "sound like a gunshot."
And the entire left wing folded upward at a catastrophic 45-degree angle. The aircraft lurched violently, immediately initiating an uncontrolled aerodynamic maneuver. Morgan fought for a few more seconds, trying to compensate, but he knew it was futile.
But the laws of physics are absolute. At 3 minutes and 45 seconds, the B-17 entered an immediate, uncontrollable spin. Morgan released the controls. He had done everything he could.
He unbuckled his harness, grabbed his parachute, and fought desperately toward the forward escape hatch. The violent, crushing centrifugal force of the spin was trying to pin him to the left side of the cockpit, making movement just agonizingly difficult.
And finally, the moment came. 4 minutes. Morgan reached the hatch, positioned himself, and jumped. He was violently flung away from the disintegrating aircraft. The Yankee Doodle was breaking apart in midair behind him.
The wings, the fuselage, the tail all tumbling in separate burning pieces. Debris rained down across 5 square miles of the German countryside. Morgan pulled his ripcord.
The sharp jerk of the deployed parachute brought a sudden, shocking silence. And in that terrifying quiet, drifting toward enemy territory, Morgan did the final check of his duty.
He counted the parachutes dotting the sky. 1, 2, 3. He reached 9. All 7 captured crew members, plus himself and Chen. Quinn and Walsh were gone, lost in the initial attack, but the remaining 9 men were alive because 1 man chose to stay.
So Morgan lands hard in a snow-covered field in Bavaria, and training kicks in immediately.
Right. His first action was to roll with the impact and instantly conceal his parachute. That vast expanse of white silk was basically a beacon. He jammed it into a drainage ditch, covering it meticulously with snow and dead grass. The war had moved from the air to the ground.
And he checked his essential gear. This escape kit was a marvel of intelligence preparation.
Oh, it really was. A silk map showing routes to neutral Switzerland, a tiny compass disguised as a button, 3 days worth of high-energy chocolate bars, water purification tablets, a rubber water bottle.
Benzodrine tablets to combat exhaustion and cold, German currency Reich's marks, and, critically, a small hacksaw blade hidden deep inside his boot heel.
His initial assessment was grim. 15 miles northeast of Regensburg. He needed to cover 180 miles to reach neutral Switzerland. That meant crossing the entirety of enemy territory in a freezing winter, wearing a distinct U.S. Army Air Force uniform.
Survival required civilian clothes, and fast.
He ran through the strict rules of evasion, drilled into every single airman, move only at night, avoid all civilian contact, never use roads or bridges, eat only tiny amounts of the chocolate ration.
And he found a hiding spot beneath a massive fallen oak tree, barely large enough to sit, but completely invisible from the air or the ground. He would wait there until nightfall, roughly 1,730 hours. That's 7 hours in -degree temperatures.
And just think about the psychological toll of those 7 hours. The adrenaline high from the crash is plummeting, the intense cold is setting in, and he's forced into absolute stillness.
He's running on pure will, reciting German phrases he might need. Bin Amerikaner, I am American. In Kriegsgefangener, I am a prisoner of war. Knowing those words were his only protection against potential civilian violence if he was caught.
At 1330 hours, his cover was nearly blown. He heard voices, German Wehrmacht troops, conducting a methodical search pattern for survivors.
He counted 8 soldiers, armed and moving systematically. He overheard fragments of their conversation, confirming the threat. The German government had offered a bomber crew reward to any civilian who reported or captured an airman.
The soldiers passed within 15 feet of his position, and the most excruciating moment. One soldier stopped directly in front of the oak tree, lit a cigarette, stood smoking for what must have felt like an eternity, and then, without looking down, rejoined his unit.
I mean, that is the definition of a near miss.
Absolutely. Morgan waited until the footsteps faded entirely, paralyzed by cold and fear before he even dared to move.
He knew survival protocol demanded he head south alone immediately, but John Morgan was a commander.
He felt an undeniable obligation to his men, scattered across the Bavarian countryside. He decided to spend one night searching. It was a massive deviation from training, but it was a pure act of leadership. After dark, he moved, stopping every 50 meters to give the specific crew recognition signal, 3 short whistles.
And against all odds, that signal actually worked.
It did. Yeah. At 2115 hours, he heard a faint response from the northeast. He found Chen, the co-pilot, exhausted but in one piece. Chen confirmed seeing other chutes land. They moved together, signaling.
The reunion continued. At 2245 hours, they found Russo, the engineer, and Hayes, the radio operator, hiding inside a dry barn.
By 0138 hours, they located O'Brien, the ball turret gunner, and Jackson, the tail gunner, near a frozen creek. 6 men accounted for 2 killed, 2 waist gunners lost sight of, but 6 core survivors gathered together.
Morgan convened the group and laid out the situation with brutal honesty. They were 90 miles in, 180 miles to Switzerland, and he gave them the choice: stick together, which increased their visibility and reduced their speed, or split up into smaller pairs.
The response was immediate and unanimous. All 5 men chose to stay with Morgan. They had entrusted him with their lives in the air. They would trust him on the ground.
They moved south through the night. They even witnessed a German military convoy on the main road, trucks, half-tracks, and motorcycles. A sobering reminder that they were fugitives in a functional war zone.
At dawn on February 24th, they found an abandoned, isolated hunting lodge. It provided temporary, inadequate shelter. They rested, posting sentries, but their chocolate rations were dwindling rapidly.
And it was almost immediately after resting that disaster struck again.
Yeah. Jackson, on sentry duty, spotted a patrol of 6 German soldiers approaching the lodge.
Jackson whistled the alarm. The crew scrambled, fleeing through the back windows into the dense forest. German gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets kicked up snow around Morgan's boots as they scattered.
Morgan dove behind a thick, fallen log, listening to the shouts and the intermittent bursts of fire.
He was prepared to fight, but then he heard the chilling sound of surrender. Chen's voice, clear and loud. "We surrender. We surrender."
The Germans marched their prisoners away. Morgan waited, counting the retreating footsteps and voices. 4 men, Chen, Russo, Hayes, and O'Brien, had been captured.
Morgan waited until the forest was completely silent. He then found Jackson shaking violently, hiding under a snow-covered bush 200 meters away.
So now it's 2 men left out of 10, Morgan and Jackson, the commander and the tail gunner. A thin hope of evasion remained, but now with only half their supplies and relentless German hunting parties closing in.
Their incredible journey continued for 3 more days. They managed to steal civilian clothes from a lonely farmhouse and potatoes from a root cellar, trading their high-visibility uniforms for bulky, ill-fitting civilian garments.
They walked 30 miles south, sleeping in barns and abandoned buildings, pushing their exhausted bodies toward the distant mountains.
But their luck ran out completely on February 27th at dawn. They misjudged the distance and were caught crossing a large open field in the pale morning light.
A farmer spotted them, raised the alarm, and local police arrived within minutes. Unarmed, exhausted, and with nowhere left to run, Morgan and Jackson surrendered without violence.
They were taken to a Luftwaffe base for processing. Morgan gave his required name, rank, and serial number. He was brought before a Luftwaffe officer, likely from intelligence, who spoke fluent, unaccented English.
And the officer confirmed the facts. Lieutenant John Morgan, B-17 pilot, crashed near Regensburg.
And then came the unexpected question, the ultimate recognition of Morgan's sacrifice. The officer stated, flatly, "You stayed at the controls to allow your crew to escape."
Morgan realized his captured crew had told the Germans exactly what had happened. They knew the whole story.
And Morgan's reply, delivered with the exhaustion of 4 days of evasion, was simple and honest. "I did what any commander would do."
The officer acknowledged his answer, assured him he would be transferred to Stalag Luft III, the officer camp, and treated according to the Geneva Convention. Morgan's active war was over. His new war, a war of endurance, had just begun.
So Morgan spent 15 months in captivity at Stalag Luft III. He endured near starvation, severe dysentery, and the unimaginable cold of the Polish winters.
And the culmination of his endurance was the infamous Long March in January 1945. As the Soviet forces advanced, the Germans forced 10,000 POWs, including Morgan, to march 90 miles across the countryside in blizzard conditions, often going days without food or shelter.
When he was finally liberated by British forces on May 8, 1945, he weighed just 115 pounds. He'd lost 60 pounds of body mass during his 15 months of incarceration.
But the ultimate tally held fast. Klein and Walsh died in the initial attack. The 7 crew members, Chen, Russo, Hayes, O'Brien, Rivera, Anderson, and Jackson, all survived the war as POWs. Morgan lost 2, but he saved 9 lives in those 4 minutes of command.
Morgan was eventually awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his action. The citation was explicit about his decision to remain at the controls of the burning aircraft.
But to truly grasp the scale of this sacrifice, we have to pull back from the cockpit and zoom out to face the horrifying statistical calculus every man in the 8th Air Force endured.
That's the crucial pivot, isn't it? Morgan survived the physical war, but the B-17 success paradox defines the cost. The B-17 delivered half the bombs dropped on Germany, establishing strategic air supremacy. But the sheer cost in human lives was just staggering.
The statistics are horrifyingly precise. Only 35% of B-17 airmen survived their required 25-mission tour of duty.
Only 35%.
That means nearly 2 out of every 3 men, 65% were killed, wounded, or captured. The sources are correct. The odds were statistically worse than playing Russian roulette.
And you have to look at events like the Second Schweinfurt raid on October 14, 1943. The U.S. Army Air Forces sent 291 B-17s. 60 of them failed to return.
That's a 20% loss rate in a single day. 600 men just gone. That devastation forced the U.S. to halt deep penetration raids until long-range fighter escorts could be developed, because they were simply running out of crews.
And the danger wasn't just the enemy. The environment itself was a killer.
Oh, absolutely. Flying at 25,000 feet, where the outside temperature was often minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit, the aircraft was a brutal machine. You think about the waist gunners, Rivera and Anderson, who had open windows for their machine guns. Frostbite was a constant enemy. Airmen lost fingers and toes regularly.
And then there was the quiet, unseen threat, anoxia. The oxygen systems, crucial for survival at altitude, frequently malfunctioned in the extreme cold.
And the terrifying part is that airmen suffering from anoxia often experience a sort of euphoria and slowly lose consciousness without any distress or warning. Half of all airmen, the research shows, experience some degree of oxygen deprivation during their tours, leading to errors and sometimes silent death.
The position you flew literally determined your life expectancy.
It really did. And this brings us to a fascinating yet tragic aha moment about position-specific lethality.
Okay, so let's start with the exposed crew. The bombardiers, like Klein, had the highest death rate during combat, 16.3% killed and 17.7% wounded. They were sitting right in the nose, a vast area of plexiglass and aluminum, the primary target for head-on attacks.
Right. And navigators, like Walsh, faced similar high rates. The tail gunners, like Jackson, were isolated targets, facing a 17.3% death rate.
Now look at the pilot position, which Morgan occupied. They had the lowest reported casualty rates, 7.3% killed. But you're saying this figure is deeply misleading.
It is, because of survivor bias. If the pilot died or was incapacitated, the B-17 usually crashed violently, taking the entire crew with it. Dead pilots rarely returned to base to be recorded as individual casualties. They were just counted in the overall loss of the aircraft. Morgan's action of holding the plane stable was an active rejection of this statistical certainty.
Which brings us to perhaps the most chilling position, the ball turret gunner, occupied by O'Brien. Mechanically, this position was a death trap.
It was. While statistics show they suffered fewer casualties during flight than the nose or tail positions, they had the lowest survival rate if the plane was shot down.
And the reason is purely mechanical.
Purely mechanical. The ball turret hung beneath the fuselage. To enter or exit, the gunner had to rotate the turret to a very specific, inverted position to line up the narrow hatch with the interior of the fuselage.
When a bomber was falling apart, spinning or exploding, the simple act of rotation and climbing out took critical time seconds they just did not have. Many were trapped.
Yeah, crashing into the earth still inside the turret. It speaks to the utter horror of that final moment. This is the reality captured by the poet Randall Jarrell in The Death of the Ball Turret Gunner. He ends the 5-line poem with that horrific, precise image. When I died, they washed me out of the turret with a hose.
And that imagery was tragically an accurate depiction of the aftermath of retrieving those trapped gunners.
It was. And remember, before any of this combat even happened, 8,000 men died in training accidents, mechanical failures, pilot error, unforgiving weather, before they ever even reached a combat zone. That was the grim, unrelenting reality of this war.
To really appreciate the weight of Morgan's 4-minute choice, we have to understand the grinding, relentless psychological pressure of the standard mission clock.
Right. It wasn't just a combat flight, it was an endless cycle of terror and duty.
The day began at 0400 hours, pre-dawn wake-up, a ritual of powdered eggs and lukewarm coffee. Then 0500, the briefing. The targets were revealed, the expected strength of flak and fighter interception outline.
And chaplains offered final prayers. And that grim ritual. Men wrote letters home, letters stamped to be mailed only if I fail to return. They were sealing their own potential death notices.
0700, engine start. 4 engines per B-17, 300 aircraft in a raid that's 1,200 roaring Wright Cyclone engines, creating a physical tremor that shook the ground.
Ground crews who had labored all night preparing the aircraft stood at attention and saluted as the bombers taxied away, knowing they would be counting the empty parking spots tomorrow.
0730, takeoff. It took an agonizing hour for the B-17s to slowly assemble into the rigid formation, circling at precise altitudes, maintaining radio silence to avoid detection.
Then 1000. They entered the flak corridor. As they approached the targets, they had to fly straight and level through the black puffs of exploding 88mm anti-aircraft shells. This was shrapnel flying past the aircraft at lethal speed.
And pilots couldn't evade without scattering the bomb pattern.
Yeah.
This was the moment of maximum helplessness, just sitting and praying the next burst wasn't beneath your seat.
10-point with Anna. The bomb run began. The bombardier took control, focusing entirely on the Norden bomb site. 10.20. Bombs away. The aircraft lurched upward, suddenly several tons lighter. Then the dangerous turn for home, where the German fighters focused on the stragglers and the damaged aircraft.
The flight home took 2 excruciating hours, trying to nurse damaged planes and wounded men back to England. Then 1300, debriefing, trying to describe the indescribable chaos.
And at 1400, rest, trying to sleep, trying to ignore the empty bunks left by men who didn't return, knowing there would be a mission tomorrow and the day after until you completed 25 missions or until you didn't return.
Morgan's 16th mission put him in the cockpit of what was essentially a meticulously packaged flying bomb.
It really was. When he held the Yankee Doodle level for those 4 minutes, he was sitting directly above 2,000 gallons of highly flammable aviation fuel, 5,000 pounds of undropped explosives still in the bomb bay, and thousands of rounds of .50 caliber ammunition.
All of it on fire, or about to be.
He had seen other bombers disintegrate instantly. He knew the risk was an instantaneous violent explosion.
And he chose to fight that dying aircraft anyway. He chose to buy time. This decision wasn't unique to Morgan. Many pilots made similar sacrificial choices, but it speaks volumes about the incredible bond forged in that B-17 environment, a bond that superseded the protocol and the instinct for self-preservation.
10 men packed into that cramped, freezing aluminum tube, completely dependent on the other 9 men doing their jobs perfectly. One failure meant death for everyone. This environment fostered bonds stronger than family.
They knew each other's fears, their families, their hometowns. When Morgan held that burning bomber level, he wasn't saving 9 strangers, he was saving his brothers, men who had shared the same terror for 15 prior missions.
After the war, when Morgan returned to Ohio, the physical recovery was difficult. He was skeletal at 115 pounds. His mother barely recognized him. Physical health returned in about 6 weeks, but the emotional scars, the nightmares, the flinching at sudden noises, the years he couldn't sleep without the lights on, those were much deeper.
When he received the Distinguished Flying Cross in June 1945, he said he felt nothing. No pride, no sense of accomplishment, just emptiness. The medal felt hollow because Klein and Walsh were dead.
He buried the war completely. He studied engineering, married in 1947, had children, and for decades he never spoke publicly about the war. The medal stayed hidden in a drawer.
But the true meaning of his sacrifice, the depth of the loyalty he inspired, that was revealed decades later.
Yeah, at a B-17 crew reunion in 1976, Morgan reunited with Chen and the surviving crew. For the first time, Morgan talked about those 4 minutes, and Chen revealed something extraordinary that Morgan had never known, something that quantified the bond he had created.
What was it?
Chen told Morgan that when he went to evacuate the rear crew members, several of the men had refused to jump. They wanted to stay and help Morgan fly the burning aircraft, unwilling to abandon their commander.
Wow.
Chen said he had to physically shove them toward the escape hatch, ordering them out, even knowing they were abandoning their leader to almost certain death. Chen's words were powerful. They would have died with you if I hadn't forced them out. That's how much they trusted you.
That revelation changes the entire emotional weight of the story. It wasn't just Morgan sacrificing for them, they were ready to sacrifice themselves for him.
The ripple effect of those 4 minutes was profound and generational. O'Brien, the ball turret gunner, named his first son John. Hayes became a commercial pilot and told Morgan's story to every single trainee he instructed, framing it as the ultimate example of command responsibility.
And Jackson, the tail gunner, wrote faithfully to Morgan's family during the months Morgan was missing as a POW, assuring them that their son had saved his life.
In 1982, Morgan, then 70, was invited to speak at a military academy. He finally broke his decades of silence. When a cadet asked him the inevitable question, "Sir, weren't you scared?" Morgan admitted the truth of those 4 minutes.
And what did he say?
Terrified, absolutely terrified. But fear wasn't the deciding factor. Responsibility was. He told them leadership meant doing the hard thing when it needed to be done, regardless of the personal cost or the statistical outcome.
When John Morgan died in 2003 at age 81, James Chen delivered the eulogy.
He did. Chen, 83 years old at the time, made the legacy crystal clear, emphasizing the generational impact. He said, "John Morgan gave me 58 years I wouldn't have had. My children wouldn't exist. My grandchildren wouldn't exist. Everything I am, everything my family is, exists because one man made a choice in a burning cockpit over Germany."
That choice resulted in 47,000, 8th Air Force casualties, 26,000 killed, 21,000 captured. It was a nearly quarter casualty rate out of roughly 200,000 men. These were ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, facing a nearly certain statistical end, yet they kept flying because of that loyalty.
The core insight of this deep dive into Lieutenant John Morgan's 4-minute command is that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the adherence to loyalty and duty despite the terror and the certainty of death.
In those 4 minutes, fighting the roll, forcing his co-pilot out, timing his own escape until the physical structure of the aircraft failed, Morgan defined his leadership.
His immortality isn't found in his medal or his career, but in that ripple effect, the children and grandchildren of the men he saved. He demonstrated that leadership is a physical, painful commitment that often requires sacrificing the self for the collective.
The source material leaves us with a provocative and sobering final thought. Morgan died in 2003. Chen died in 2015. The last surviving member of Morgan's crew, Henry Jackson, the tail gunner who called out the Bandit's 11.0 high that started it all, died in 2019.
So when the last witnesses are gone, when the men who felt the heat of the flames and heard the wing spar snap are no longer here to tell the tale, how does the memory of such profound selflessness survive?
What duty do we have as inheritors of this history to keep that memory, those 4 minutes of sacrifice, immortal?